Silence can be a really amazing thing, but there's one problem. We don't like silence. Have you ever been in a doctor's office or in a waiting room and find yourself sitting there and it's silent? And have you ever felt awkward because of the silence? I think we all have. We will do anything to keep our minds occupied and to keep from being idle or seeming silly for just sitting there and doing nothing. We'll pick up and read a magazine that we would have never gave a second glance at otherwise. Or we'll get on our phones and check social media or even fake text just so it doesn't seem like we're being idle or silly. Here's another question that refers to that one about the doctor's office. Have you ever been by yourself and felt uncomfortable because of the silence? Is it similar to the doctor's office example? Do you create busyness or noise in order to avoid silence, even when you're alone? This is not me saying that reading magazines or checking social media is bad or anything, because, it's not. But the question that I'm wanting to emphasize is, why do we feel uncomfortable during silence? Why is that? I typed the word silence into my Bible app, and this account from Matthew is one of the things that came up. So I want to go ahead and turn there. It's Matthew 22, starting with verse 23. The Pharisees and the Sadducees both asked Jesus some really good questions. I think they kind of had malicious motives, to kind of trip him up. And in normal Jesus fashion, you can't trip him up. But so I don't want to focus so much on on the specific question that they ask, but I want to focus on how the crowd responded, how the Sadducees and the Pharisees, what it did to them, what the answer did to them after Jesus answered them. So starting in verse 23, it says, "The same day Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, 'Teacher, Moses said if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother.'" So then they kind of explain their question, and it's a really interesting question, and Jesus gives a really amazing answer. But again, I'm not going to focus on the question itself. That really deserves its own Red Couch devotional. But I want to skip down to verse 33, which is right after Jesus gives his answer. So in verse 33, it says, "And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him." And then he asked the question, the Pharisee, who was a lawyer. So I think it's interesting that in verse 34 it says, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together," to ask him a question. So what Jesus did to the Sadducees was that he silenced them. As it says in verse 34, he had silenced them, and the crowd was astonished at his teaching. So again, here the Pharisees, they're gonna give it a shot now to see if they can trip him up. And so they ask him the question, and again, a very great question, but I want to move on to the end, what it did to them. And it says in verse 46, "And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare ask him any more questions. And no one was able to answer him a word." So Jesus put both of these religious leaders from both of these groups, from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he put them all to silence. And I think that's remarkable. And then it begs the question, why did Jesus go this route of making his point to those who opposed him? Why did he go that route? He could have walked on water, fed 5,000 people with a few loaves and some fish, or he could have called down legions of angels, because he is God. But he didn't do those things. Instead, he put everyone to silence. If you stop and think about nothing for a while, things will automatically start to surface in your mind. So I want you all to try this. Just sit in silence for 60 seconds. Just if you want to, you can pause the video or whatever, or maybe you already know what's going to happen. Sit in silence for 60 seconds and just think about nothing. Just literally have zero thoughts in your head. It's hard, isn't it? You will find that it is nearly impossible to just sit and actually have zero thoughts in your mind, unless you're Emmett from the Lego movie.
Whoa, are we inside my brain right now? It's big. I must be smart.
Silence is like a great big magnifying glass. It makes thoughts clearer to us than they were when we were distracted. And if we can invite God into that, it's a really amazing experience. Here's something that I personally do. I take some time every now and then, and I just sit and enjoy the peace and silence with my Heavenly Father. Keyword, with my Heavenly Father. I sit and just meditate on God and just kind of say, here I am, Lord. I've talked a lot and I've prayed a lot. I want this, God, I want that, and I've got to do this. God, help me with this. I just want to sit and enjoy and just kind of let you just meditate and marvel at you. And it's amazing what happens. When negative thoughts emerge, I get to take them captive into the obedience of Christ, as 2 Corinthians chapter 10 says. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. I found that kind of hard. Whenever I first read that, I was like, how are we supposed to do that? Like, how are we supposed to take thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ? Like it just wasn't very clear to me how we're supposed to do that. And I think silence and doing like that tactic, like I said, just kind of sitting in silence with God, I think is a perfect way of doing that. Of just saying, just being open with God and just inviting God into the negative thoughts that you may have, that emerge. Just saying, God, I'm having this negative thought, or I'm having these thoughts of hatred or lust or something contrary to the fruits of the Spirit. And just invite God into that and just let Him help you with it, A lot of times we think, oh, that's God, that's unholy, and God doesn't want to hear about that. I just need to push that away and just almost, don't bother God with it. But I think the important thing to do is invite God into that, because I can't take care of those kind of thoughts myself. And I think I think silence is a great way to do this. I think the reason Jesus went the route of putting everyone to silence that day, instead of displaying some physical sign, was to give everyone present there the amazing gift of silence. So to sum it up, I just want to say that God can use silence to reveal to yourself what is really bothering you. And if we invite God into that, He can help us heal. When was the last time that you just spent some silence with God? When was the last time that you allowed God to reveal to yourself the deep things of your heart? When was the last time that you allowed God to be intimately involved in the deep things of your heart? I want to leave you all with this thought. Try taking some time to sit with God in silence. Allow Him to reveal yourself to yourself. Invite Him into that and see what amazing things He will do in your heart.